Welcome everybody to the Cover 2 Podcast World Series edition here. My name's Nick Neenan.
I'm Jared Smith.
And today we're going to be recapping the World Series. It happened last night. We will also be going over the NFL trade deadline, looking at some of the minor trades, and also looking at what happened with the whole Jamal Adams, Jets-Cowboys situation. And we will also dive into the big Florida-Georgia football game this Saturday that has title game ramifications. But let's move it back to that amazing World Series. Jerry, we previewed it last week. Both of us said it was going to go 6. Both of us said the Astros were going to win.
We were wrong.
Yeah, it went 7. One of the best World Series I've seen in a while. In a series where no home teams won. The Nationals obviously pulled it out. Big win for that city. First World Series win in the city of Washington, D.C. since 1924. Now, the team hasn't existed in Washington, D.C. in all those years. It's not like a Cubs-Red Sox situation, but it essentially an entire generation of people hadn't seen a title for a baseball team in the city, and they finally got it. And it took literally to the last couple innings for it to actually happen.
I mean, I saw videos on Instagram and Twitter of fans crying, because they've waited for so long for this moment to happen. And in that instance, that emotion was almost like when the Red Sox won for the first time, when the Cubs won for the first time in over 100 years. To be a fan of a team for so long and have your team be so bad and not be in contention. And even for this year, I mean, think about it. We go back to the offseason where Bryce Harper, arguably one of the best players in Major League Baseball, one of the faces of baseball, leaves your franchise and everyone kind of counts you out, right? And then we get close to the All-Star break and this Nationals team is 12 games below 500. And no one thinks that this team is going to be able to come back and do what they did. And somehow this team pulled together and they were able to get it done. It's just simply amazing. So this story of this Washington Nationals team is more than just, a team that was put together by money or a juggernaut that everyone expected. They came from out of nowhere, and I think that makes this even a greater story to talk about.
No, it isn't. Like you were saying, unless you are 96 years old, living in the state of Washington, D.C. your whole life, you had not seen a World Series. It was since 1924. And even this season, like you mentioned, Bryce Harper disrespects the team, leaves, asks for all this money, then goes to a division rival in the Philadelphia Phillies.
And they don't even make the playoffs.
It's amazing. At one point, the Nationals, you probably heard this ad nauseum, were 19-31. They had a team meeting that they attempted to turn this around. The manager, Dave Martinez, was on the hot seat in only his first year. They were a plus 5,000 favorite to win the World Series in May. And they won the World Series and beat arguably the best team in baseball this year in the Houston Astros and one of the best pitching staffs of all time for a World Series set. So, we'll kind of dive into Game 7 now because that was a game you guys obviously remember the most because it just did happen. It was the last game of the season. Nationals win it 6-2. Anthony Rendon with a big home run. Zach Greinke, an awesome start. Max Scherzer, another great story from this team. Couldn't walk on Sunday.
4 days ago.
Couldn't walk on Sunday. Had to have his wife drive him to the game and help him to the stadium for Game 5. A game he was originally supposed to start. He goes 5 innings and has an amazing start. He only gives up 2 runs.
A little cortisone shot, and everyone feels better, right?
Exactly. He said it was great. And then of course you have Howie Kendrick with a big home run in the 7th inning. They ended up being the game winner in the end. Juan Soto, another great game in Game 7. It was just. What do you have to say? Like, this Nationals team literally never gave up. They were in 5 elimination games, and in every single game, they were trailing at one point going into the 7th inning. Like, it's something you just don't see a lot. The true comeback kids, right? Amazing performance. What did you see from this game, and what do you think about maybe some of the pitching moves that the Astros made in this game?
Right, just my overall general sense of this World Series match was I saw a lot of grit from the Nationals, right? You're going up against a juggernaut opponent in the Houston Astros who have been to 2 consecutive World Series before this year.
Yeah.
They have the pitching, they have the hitting, they had the home field advantage. Everything was leaning towards the Houston Astros. And all of a sudden, you've got this Washington Nationals team that everyone's saying, oh, okay, great. They beat the Dodgers, they swept the Cardinals, but now they're going up against arguably the best team in baseball, right? There's no way they're going to be able to beat this team, especially without having home field advantage. They come out and they win the first 2 games. The resiliency from this team and the never give up mentality is really what I took out of this. You know, you have the timely hits from Soto and Howie Kendrick, and obviously you have the great pitching from Scherzer and Strasburg being the World Series MVP. But it's just, you know, it's just the fact that this team was kind of, you know, I don't want to say thrown together because I'm not trying to undermine the greatness of this team, but it's just kind of mind-boggling to think that a team that was not made up full of stars can come and you know, beat a team that is full of stars, right? And you know, obviously with baseball, it is a team sport. It's not necessarily like basketball where it just takes one star to elevate a team. You need a mix of great pitching and great hitting to go along the way. But it just you know, there weren't really other than Strasburg and Scherzer. Can you really say that this team has any other stars or faces of a franchise?
I would say Anthony Rendon. For sure.
Okay.
But he's an impending free agent, so he might not be the guy, you know, in the end. Anthony Rendon was the MVP candidate this year. Kind of came into his own. Having to take over the role for someone we mentioned, Bryce Harper, who was kind of their guy, whether his stats kind of showed it or not. He was still probably the most feared guy in the lineup every night. Once he was traded, there was kind of an unknown in how good Juan Soto would be at this young age. He ended up being great, but Anthony Rendon still stepped up. And I thought on the hitting side of it, Rendon was an absolute star. Soto ended up being an absolute star in the end and is a star in the making, one of the best young players in the game of baseball. But yeah, I mean, when you look at Strasburg and Scherzer, 35 years old, had been in a World Series before with Detroit, had been dominant, had won Cy Youngs, has multiple no-hitters, but still hadn't won that World Series. Steven Strasburg, of course, #1 pick. They were showing his games in the minors back in the day. Right. Comes out 14 strikeouts in his first game, held out of the playoffs back in the day to preserve essentially for this moment. And it was great to see those guys step up. And it was interesting because, you know, before we actually do get into the stuff about Game 7, I do want to talk about one thing. You mentioned this before, right when I walked in to start the podcast, was you mentioned that like there was no clear advantages in this series. Like the star players all played great. Nobody really disappointed. No home field advantage, clearly, because not one home team won in this series.
Wow.
And there was never a doubt of, like, or actually there was a lot of doubt every single game who was going to win, besides the 1 or 2 blowouts that was in this series. But because you just thought, oh, Astros are going to come back. Like, Carlos Correa will have a big home run. Jose Altuve will do what he did against the Yankees. Juan Soto come up with some big, Anthony Rendon. Like, it was like...
Just back and forth.
Yeah, every single game was interesting because up until 7th, 8th inning, it was like, what's going to happen? Yes, there was games where it kind of got blown out of proportion later in the game just because of how the score ended up. But, man, was this a fun series to watch. I'm actually disappointed I actually missed one of the games. Like, it just...
Can we talk about Ryan Zimmerman for a minute?
Oh, I know. How did you not?
The journeyman, right? Washington National, who's been with the club for his entire career, I believe 15 years?
I think he was drafted. I think he's been in the organization 15 years.
Okay.
I think he was called up in the majors the first year they were in Nationals Park. So I think that was 2008. Over a decade.
Right. Still, the fact that a journeyman player who's been, you know, in today's sports, not even just baseball, you can talk about the NFL, basketball, the National Hockey League. Players don't necessarily stick with one team for the longevity of their careers, especially when you get into the 10th, 11th, and 12th years of your career. Usually by then, there's a trade or a buyout or something like that. But the fact that Ryan Zimmerman has stayed with this team and showed his own resiliency, right? Because I'm sure that there have been points where he was probably fed up with the team because they haven't been playing well. They haven't made it to the postseason, and he could have very easily left and gone to play for another team. He chose to stick it out and he does get rewarded. I think that's one of the other kind of underlying stories, and one of the best stories from this World Series is the fact that, hey, Ryan Zimmerman, a guy that stays with his team, shows his loyalty, finally gets a ring.
No, absolutely. I mean, I was so happy for Ryan Zimmerman. I was hoping in the end, especially when they went 7, that Zimmerman was gonna, he was gonna have big play. I know he did have at least one big base hit in this game as well. I believe he did score one of the runs later in the game, so he did contribute literally on the field as well. I remember hearing before the playoffs too that he was he couldn't play every game. Like there was just because of his body, there was no way he was going to have to kind of platoon.
Kind of rest management.
Obviously, it gets a little different once you get in the World Series later in those games. He played almost every single game, but it's just like Scherzer. Like Scherzer just he's falling apart literally. Like they make it all the way to Game 7. They both contribute.
And they just gut it out.
Yeah, what's funny is you mentioned not only do teams not stick with their teams for a long time, but we've seen kind of a trend in sports overall that a lot of older players are kind of getting thrown under the bus now, and everybody's kind of trying to go as young as possible. Young players are dominating each league. You look for the Nationals, Juan Soto, 21, Ronald Acuna Jr., Mike Trout, all these guys, Alex Bregman, all these guys are super young, and they're supposed to be the leaders of the team. You don't see the Ryan Zimmermans anymore as much, and you see the free agents not getting signed, and guys like Matt Holliday not getting signed until halfway through the season and stuff like that because they're older. These guys can still contribute, and the Nationals had 4, 5, 6 of these guys on this team, and they all contributed to win this World Series. Howie Kendrick with multiple giant hits in this playoffs. He's been reaching for one for a long time. Obviously, Ryan Zimmerman, a couple big hits, and it's just good to see all of these veteran kind of players come up with some big hits.
Well, I think you said the right word, veteran. I think it shows their leadership, and even if it's not necessarily on the playing field, it can be in the dugout, it can be in the clubhouse, it could be, hey, giving Juan Soto specific advice on going up against a specific pitcher, right? These are huge moments, and I believe it was Juan Soto who said in Game 1 of this World Series, his first at bat, he's like, my legs were shaking. He's like, it took me my second at bat to actually calm down.
And then he hit 415
and get into the game, right? So to have that veteran leadership, even if it's not on the field, just someone to bounce an idea off of, or to kind of give you a kind of jolt and say, hey man, calm down, you can do this. You're here for a reason. I think that veteran leadership and veteran presence is huge for a ball club, no matter what the sport. So it's almost that, you have to have that mix of great young talent for the future, but also veteran leadership to come in and kind of school that talent, because it can't always be the manager or the coach that has to coach the team, right? You have to have that veteran locker room presence in order to keep the locker room kind of even keeled.
Yeah, because those players are playing on the field. The coach can only do so much, but he's not going to ever be on the field catching any of the balls, pitching, or hitting during the games. If you look at the last couple World Series, the Astros, when they won, had guys like Brian McCann, Carlos Beltran that had won World Series. They were veteran voices. This year, not so much. A lot of younger players or guys that had kind of been around the team for a long time. Not to say that they don't have veterans. Jose Altuve, not the youngest player anymore, but he's still obviously a superstar. Yuli Gurriel is an older player, but is kind of just joined the major leagues. So they didn't have a lot of veterans, and I think that kind of showed where they would score early, and there wasn't a lot of extra runs that they scored later in these games. They kind of tried to rely on the big inning and then moved on and then tried to rely on the home run. That just didn't work in this series. The Red Sox last year, they had guys like Steve Pearce, who ended up being the World Series MVP, JD Martinez, David Price, Rick Porcello, all these guys that had been trying for a World Series year after year after year. But this Nationals team really took the cake with it. I mean, they had guys like Anibal Sanchez who hadn't won, Brian Dozier, Kurt Suzuki hit a big home run in this series. It was big. They had a fun team to watch, and it wasn't because they were young and they over celebrated and they threw their bats and stuff like that. It was because it was just clutch hitting after clutch hitting after clutch hitting, and then great pitching as well. I mean, there really wasn't, like we said, there really wasn't any horrible pitching performances in this series, and really no bad hitters in this series. It was truly, truly amazing to watch the Nationals get this World Series. But let's get back to Game 7. And I did want to I did want to touch on this before we kind of go into talk about the free agents from these teams. Why didn't Garrett Cole have a part in Game 7? Arguably the best pitcher you could have threw out there yesterday. What happened? Why did AJ Hinch not bring him in?
That's a question for AJ Hinch. That's a great question, Nick. Yeah. You should ask him that question. Listen, I don't understand. This is Game 7. There is no Game 8, right? There is no tomorrow. This is it. I understand that Cole did pitch in Game 5, obviously. But guess what? He had 2 days of rest. Yeah. They had an off day in between Game 5 and Game 6. And then obviously he didn't pitch in Game 6. So, yeah, he's not going to be maybe at 100%. But guess what? He's your best pitcher. Yeah. Your next best available option. So, I really don't understand why they wouldn't go to him, even if it was just for 1 inning to give your relief kind of extra time or, a little extra boost. I don't know. I'm not the baseball guru. I kind of defer to you when it comes to this. So I'm stunned. I'm stupid. I don't have an answer for why you wouldn't put your best pitcher in when it is all on the line. Right? Do you think that was the reason why the Astros lost this game? Because they didn't put Cole in? I mean, I feel like it has to be a consideration. It has to be a factor.
It definitely didn't help your chances that you were going to put in a lot of relievers that hadn't been in this huge moment or had been used a lot. The prime example, Will Harris, who I don't know exactly how many games he was used in this World Series, but I believe he was used 4 out of the last 5 games or 4 out of the last 5 days or something like that. He was the one that went in and kind of piped the pitch to Howie Kendrick that ended up being a home run. That barely was a home run. It was a couple feet from being
a home run nonetheless.
No, exactly. But so that's what happens, and baseball is a game of inches, and that's what happens. And going into it, if you watched right before first pitch, they threw it to Ken Rosenthal, who's one of the reporters on the field, that said the plan for the Astros today is to have Greinke go as long as he wants, but he's not on a super long leash because he hadn't been super great in these playoffs so far. Had a great game the last time he pitched in the World Series, but didn't, overall had been kind of sketchy. And then they were going to go to Garrett Cole if it was the start of a new inning. They weren't going to make a starting pitcher come in the middle of an inning.
Right.
And they were going to bring in their closer, Marcell Ozuna, if they needed 1 or 2 outs in an inning, and then bring in Garrett Cole. That just plain didn't happen. They went to Zach Greinke, pitched an awesome game. Literally almost was perfect. Through 6 innings, gave up the home run to Rendon. At that point, the score was 2-1. Then walked Juan Soto, didn't throw a lot of good pitches in that bat, so AJ Hinch, who had guys warming up in the bullpen, including Garrett Cole, brought in Will Harris, who was one of their big relievers. But, like we just mentioned, the very next batter hits a 2-run home run, puts him up 3-2. And at that point, I was saying they didn't bring in Marcell Ozuna at that point. So it's like you went back on your word, didn't do what you said, and then brought in the guy in the situation you said. So now it made sense. It was like, okay, here's Ozuna. He'll pitch 2 innings, or he'll pitch the 2 batters, get him out of the gym, which he did. And you'll go to Garrett Cole, whether you're down by 1 or 2. You're still gonna have a chance in this game. You have great hitters. You have no matter what, your star players were gonna come up again in this game. I tweeted out. I said, Garrett Cole needs to come in this next inning, no matter what, and pitch 2-3 innings, 7, 8, 9, figure it out. He didn't. They kept Ozuna in. Ozuna pitched well. I said, okay, so Garrett Cole's coming in next, right? It did end up happening. What ended up happening was the bases loaded in the top of the 9th, and they brought in Jose Urquidy, who had a good postseason, but is not the guy you put in that situation. Adam Eaton hits one right back up the middle. 2-run score, kind of put the game at a reach. And everybody's watching Garrett Cole.
And Garrett Cole's sitting there hey guys, I'm available.
Yeah, I'm available.
I can play.
But that sign right there, do that sign one more time. That's what he's saying to the team now.
I can play.
So, let's transition, because we both think that was a mistake for Garrett Cole to not come in. After the game, Garrett Cole, press conference, explained that, along with AJ Hinch, explained that he was only going to come into the game if they were winning. I get that, but also you can't lose. So why did you make it worse?
I don't get that.
Yeah, I don't get it either. But along with saying that, he also kind of thanked the organization and said that he loved playing in Houston and kind of made it seem like 90-95% sure he's going to leave.
Keyword said loved playing, not loves playing, as in he would like to stay.
Exactly. And said that he learned a lot and said he talked to his teammates, stuff like that. And there's a rumor going around that he did kind of tell his teammates that, hey, more likely I'm not going to be with this team. Because here's the thing. They have Zach Greinke under control for a couple more years. The guy obviously proved to be a very solid player and stepped up in the World Series when he needed to. They have Lance McCullers Jr. coming back next year. They still have a solid staff they could build around a couple young guys. So they're really, they don't need Garrett Cole. And I don't think they can afford Garrett Cole, knowing that they have to kind of sign some of their guys back and they're going to have some big contracts coming up here in the near future. So we both don't think he's going to stay with the Astros, obviously. So Jared, where do you see Garrett Cole going next year?
Just right up the street to lovely Anaheim Stadium. I mean, listen, he's from Orange County, right? Pitched at UCLA. For him to be able to come home. Now, here's the thing. The Angels in recent years, and I say recent as in the last 10 years, have only been willing to spend big money on bats and not necessarily pitching. Now, with their new coach, manager, and Joe Madden, I'm hoping that kind of the tide has turned a little bit and they will finally go a little bit more defensive, because we all know from an offensive standpoint that when the Angels are healthy, they can score runs. That hasn't necessarily been the issue. It's about not giving up runs.
Yeah.
And whether it's their starting pitching or their bullpen or even their closers, who they've had troubles with injuries and staying healthy, they cannot consistently pitch well. Well, if you can bring a homegrown kid from Newport Beach, went to UCLA, who I'm sure would love to come home and pitch in front of his family. We have a new manager, kind of a new face, and you can get a star like Garrett Cole. I think that is a huge kind of elevation factor, not only for this team, but to also bring in other potential stars that would want to join this club. Because right now, if you're not from Southern California, or you don't necessarily have a relationship with anyone that's currently on this Angels team, why would you want to come play for them? What would entice you to come play for them? Like the sunny weather, the nice beaches, but as far as the actual team goes,
what would team up the freeway?
Right. What would entice you to want to play for the Angels? So I think if you can bring in a giant ace like a Garrett Cole, that will help you bring other stars to this Angels team.
You know what it takes? It takes a lot of money. A good sign is, since we did our last podcast, Joe Madden did have his press conference, and Artie Moreno, during that press conference, did confirm that the payroll was going to go up. The salary for the team was going to go up. Not necessarily they're not going to blow it out and sign all these guys and stuff like that, but I think what he's mentioning is we're going to have enough money for a guy like Garrett Cole or a guy like Steven Strasburg or a guy like Madison Bumgarner that might want to come to this team. But Garrett Cole's the easy answer. He, like you said, from Newport Beach, went to Orange Lutheran High School, which is about 10 minutes away from Angel Stadium, went to UCLA, and it arguably is the best pitcher in baseball right now.
So do you have an argument against the Angels? Do you see another club?
No, well,
the Dodgers,
I don't.
The Yankees,
I do think, and I was a little skeptical on the whole, like, he's not going to sign back, but like it was evident during the last two games, and the announcers really were pushing that he was going to leave too. And then once I saw that press conference literally from his mouth after the game, it was like, okay, he's leaving, and he's probably going to go to the Angels. A couple more teams to throw out there. I think you always have to put the Yankees and Dodgers in there. Dodgers, obviously, or both these teams did not make it to the World Series, so they have, technically that right to go after a star pitcher, even though their rosters might have kind of that Golden State Kevin Durant factor there. Another interesting team that needs a starting pitcher even more than the Angels is right down the 5 freeway. That's San Diego Padres. And I think all these local teams kind of come into play here because the Padres are on the up and up. They're rebuilding, but it's going to be more of a quick rebuild. Obviously, the Angels are kind of in that weird gray area where they need Garrett Cole. They're not rebuilding, so it's like a little better situation maybe than San Diego. And then, of course, the Dodgers and the Yankees will more than likely be up for spending that money.
Right. They've been known to spend the money, to whereas the Angels and the Padres have been a little more resistant in handing out those huge contracts. But arguably right now you can say the two teams that are spending more money when we're talking about these four collective teams, the Yankees and the Dodgers, who spend money, they have seen more results than the Angels and the Padres have, who are not spending the money, right? So you're 100% right. It's not just about opening the bank and giving someone a blank check and saying, write your own ticket, but you do have to spend money to get the great players and give your team a chance to win. And specifically speaking about the Angels, you have to get some type of pitching. Like I said, you bring in an ace like Garrett Cole, and I think that only elevates their chances of bringing in other stars, or at least other solid players that the Angels can build their team around.
Absolutely. Garrett Cole will not be playing in a Houston Astros uniform unless something crazy happens. Here are two players that also played in this World Series that are also possibly impending free agents. Anthony Rendon is going to be a free agent. He will definitely test the market. Steven Strasburg has an opt-out and is only being paid $25 million a year, which is based on his season. Well, based on the season that he had and the rate that pitchers are being paid right now, he is getting underpaid. So I'm sure he will opt out, probably get paid more by the Nationals, or at least offered something. But
the Nationals better resign him.
Well,
the Nationals would be fools to let him go.
100%. They do have Max Scherzer, though, and they do have
Max Scherzer is also 35.
That's a good point. Yes, it's a good point. And so that's why we're going to talk about it. Let's start with Strasburg, because we were just talking about it. He will opt out, in my opinion. But what do you really do you really think there's a chance he goes sign somewhere else, or do you think as long as the Nationals throw him, maybe a couple more years on the contract and $5-7 more million, you think he'll just be like, yeah, I'm down?
Here's the thing. I think Strasburg is a loyal guy as well, kind of like a Ryan Zimmerman. Not saying that Strasburg will stay with the Nationals for his entire career, but I think as long as the Nationals do not insult Strasburg. And when I say that, I mean if Strasburg does indeed opt out, like Nick is saying, and he does kind of test the waters and see what other teams are potentially offering, as long as the Nationals do not lowball him and say, because you opt out, you hurt our feelings, or we're not going to give you the contract that you can get on the street. As long as they don't do that, I don't think he's going anywhere. As long as they listen. Everything's peachy right now. You just won the World Series. Winning solves a lot of issues. Not saying that there were any issues, but I think the Nationals understand that with Scherzer being 35, Strasburg is and will be the face of this franchise going forward now as a World Series champion and MVP. I think there's no way that you let this guy go. Because if you do, I think it's going to haunt you more than you losing Bryce Harper, and I don't see that happening.
I see him re-signing with this team. They drafted him number 1. There was a little bit of controversy in the beginning, obviously, with keeping him out of the playoffs for the future. Look what happened, though. In the future, they won the World Series, and he was the World Series MVP, which we hadn't even mentioned on this podcast yet. The guy literally was the best player in the World Series. And to be honest, his career in the playoffs, he's undefeated, I believe. Or at least this year, he was 5-0. Didn't lose a game. Wasn't the reason his team lost any games this season. I think that is why he also won the World Series MVP, because when you looked at it, there was obviously a lot of players that could have probably won this. Howard Kendrick had a couple big hits and had the big hit in Game 7. Anthony Rendon with a very solid series, a couple big hits too. I think when people voted for the World Series MVP, I think they were like, yeah, he literally didn't have one bad start in the whole playoffs. We'll give it to him because he performed the entire playoffs as well. So, yeah, I see Strasburg signing back. There is what I just mentioned the team a second ago. He is from San Diego. So I do think that a team that does need starting pitching, if the Padres maybe go, hey, we'll throw you $40 million. Maybe he goes, okay, I just win a World Series.
You start talking about that type of dollar, you have to at least.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Because he's technically underpaid, and if someone gives him, 30% more on the dollar than he already had, especially if it's hometown team, where you're from, I don't know. I just see there's a possibility there. If a team throws him a lot of money, obviously he has to opt out too. If he opts in, it's whatever. He's getting paid $100 million for the next 4 years, and he's watching the National. And all this doesn't matter. But I do think he'll stay, but you got to look at that hometown team maybe to throw him some money. Now let's switch. Speaking of hometowns, Anthony Rendon, we just mentioned him. Could have won the World Series MVP. Could have won the playoff MVP. Was a great player. Could have won the regular season MVP. We still don't know. Might have already won it. Won the World Series in his hometown of Houston, Texas. This dude is one of the best hitters to go on the market in the last couple of years. I even think better than Bryce Harper when you look at the stats. Coming off a near MVP season. Jared, he will test free agency. The Nationals should offer him a lot of money. He seems like a loyal guy. But I don't think this is as easy to say as Steven Strasburg. I don't really know what's going to happen with him. What do you think happens?
I mean, from the Nationals' perspective, I think you do everything you can to keep him. He's been in the league for 6 years, and he's also another young player that you can build your team around. So you re-sign Strasburg, you have your starting ace for the next 5 to 7 years. You re-sign Rendon, you have your next great bat for the next 6 to 8 years, right? So I think if you can get those two solid pieces and keep them, they now have the experience of not only playing but winning in the World Series, and you get that veteran leadership, and they get to stay at home. He's from Texas. Obviously, I don't see him, being a homer or anything like that, and necessarily going to play for the Texas Rangers or even the Houston Astros. The Houston Astros have enough hitting right now. If Anthony Rendon were to go to Houston Astros, that wouldn't be fair.
That's not
that
they have an entire infield.
That should be vetoed by Major League Baseball if that were to happen. So I think the Nationals in this aspect, and this is kind of the boring answer, I think they do everything in their power and within their payroll to keep Anthony Rendon. And I think it's kind of the same thing as long as you don't insult the player and kind of lowball them. Or, obviously a player and their agent is going to want the max dollar and the most that they can get. But if the Nationals come in relatively close to what other teams will potentially offer, I think you can then work out, a negotiation to where you can find a middle ground where both sides are very happy. So I think that's where this is. You're right. I don't think this is as easy as the Strasburg situation, but I think there could be a little bit more negotiation, and this could take, a couple weeks or maybe even a month longer. But I think in the end, understanding that this team just won the World Series and knowing that they're only going to get better. And here's another thing too. The Nationals just won the World Series when everyone counted them out, and with the lesser talent than the Houston Astros had, right? I think there's going to be other free agents that will be willing to come to the Nationals for a cheaper price, knowing that this team is on the come up, right? Yeah. So if you're a kind of a middle of the pack player and you're a free agent and you're looking to come to a ball club, why wouldn't you consider the Washington Nationals, right? Maybe you take a little bit of a pay cut, but to have an opportunity to be on a contending team, I think that plays a huge factor, and it's not always about the money for certain guys.
Yeah, no, I mean he deserves the money that he's going to get though, and I just looked up. Nolan Arenado he's obviously a third baseman that signed a huge contract in the offseason this year, along with Manny Machado. Both guys got over $30 million a year. Ooh. So Rendon is going to ask for that. He's 29, he's a little bit older than those guys, so maybe the years are a little bit less. Maybe he gets a little bit less money, but. I just think this guy deserves it. He's been a very, very solid MLB player in the last couple of years, has been turned into an all-star, some would say a superstar. So you need to pay those guys. And if it's not the Nationals, there's a lot of teams out there. The Dodgers are willing to move Justin Turner to first base to try to figure this out. I'm sure there's a lot of other teams out there, but we do need to move on to our next coverage of the NFL real quick. But amazing World Series, a great season to watch. Unfortunately, my LA Dodgers did not get it done.
Still supporting this team.
They still have not won a World Series since 1988, but what I'm showing you right now is the 2020 World Series champions.
Oh, okay. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves now, which means we do need to move on.
Yes, we do need to move on. Congrats to the Nationals one more time, and all those players, especially Ryan Zimmerman, for winning that World Series. Okay. NFL trade deadline happened before last
Tuesday.
Yeah,
Tuesday.
Come and gone after we did our last podcast. Not that great of a trade deadline. Like we've seen better in the last couple of years. There was a couple players traded here and there. Some a little bigger news than others, but nothing huge. Jerry, why don't you mention the 5 guys that really got traded?
Right, and I do want to preface this by saying the NFL is not known as a league where major trades happen at the deadline. This is not like the NBA or Major League Baseball where you see more of those huge trades with contending teams or teams that know they're not going to make it that are just fire sailing everybody. So in the NFL, it's a little bit trickier, and usually you'll see some mid-level trades or depth trades, but not necessarily a superstar, guy going from one team to the next. There was a potential trade where Jalen Ramsey, the safety for the New York Jets, was being potentially shopped around. We will get into that in just a minute. But here were the trades. Jamal Adams, I'm sorry, did I say? Forget what I said. Jalen Ramsey. Let's start with Jalen Ramsey, who even though we already did discuss this, I did just want to bring his name up. He was traded from the Jacksonville Jaguars. He did want out of Jacksonville, so he kind of forced his way out of that situation. The Rams gave up 2 first-round picks. So the Rams, who are not known to have first-round picks, at least in the last 5 years, their only first-round pick in that span was Jared Goff, who has so far worked out pretty well. But for the next foreseeable future, the Rams will not have first-round picks. But they do get the shutdown corner in Jalen Ramsey. Emmanuel Sanders was traded from the Denver Broncos to the San Francisco 49ers. I think this is one of the best trades that was made in the entire NFL. Emmanuel Sanders gets to go from a team that is, in a sense, tanking to an undefeated San Francisco 49ers team that no one saw being undefeated at this point in the year, right? So I want to get your thoughts on this. This is in the Arizona Cardinals division, obviously. Emmanuel Sanders, even though he may not be a true number 1 receiver, I think he is a very, kind of solid security blanket for Jimmy Garoppolo. Your thoughts on Emmanuel Sanders, who did, by the way, score a touchdown in his first game with the 49ers.
I think everybody scored a touchdown last week for the 49ers. But, he's a great ad. He's a little older, a little less skilled than he was, say, 5 years ago, but still a very, very good piece. And he did not fit in Denver anymore. That offense was turning, anemic. There wasn't much going on for him. But, he joins a staff of receivers that are very, very similar. Dante Pettis, Marquise Goodwin, Trent Taylor, a lot of kind of fast, smaller receivers.
Gadget.
Exactly. But it fits this new system of we're seeing with the Sean McVays, with the Kyle Shanahans, with the Cliff Kingsbury's, where you have a lot of smaller receivers running really quick routes, and it's a way of keeping the defense on their heels. So it makes sense. It adds to a team that literally hasn't lost a game. I don't ever think that's a bad idea from any teams, especially if you don't give that much up, which they did not.
Right.
And so Kyle Shanahan, who I think is probably the best offensive mind in football right now, maybe besides Josh McDaniels, he gets another gadget, and I see it as it sucks for the Cardinals this year, who still have to play the 49ers twice and have to play them actually tonight as we're recording on Thursday. But, I just think it's great for the 49ers, and it just increases their Super Bowl contendership.
Yeah, no, the 49ers, this only helps them.
Yeah.
They didn't have to give up a huge draft pick for this, so I think this was a win-win for both teams here. The next player that was moved, a new face in a new place, Mohamed Sanu, longtime Atlanta Falcon receiver, was a little overlooked. Obviously, the Falcons have Julio Jones and they have Calvin Ridley, who was their first-round draft pick of 2 years ago. So the New England Patriots, of all teams, the undefeated New England Patriots, so far the best team in the NFL. And once again, Bill Belichick makes a very smart, savvy move to get a veteran player to add to the weapons that Tom Brady now has. The Patriots gave up a second-round pick for Mohamed Sanu, and I think that's very solid. I think that was a win for both teams. Mohamed Sanu already showing his veteran presence, and he's kind of a bigger body receiver, but the one thing that he's known to do is run very crisp, clean routes, and I think in this New England-style offense, that is something that is desperately needed. They drafted N'Keal Harry, the first-round pick out of Arizona State, but he's been injured and on injured reserve the entire season so far. So even though he was brought in to be that kind of bigger type receiver, the Patriots haven't been able to use him yet. hence why they went out and signed Mohamed Sanu, a veteran player who just 3 years ago, was facing the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl when he was a member of the Atlanta Falcons. So he knows his team very well. And once again, a player that goes from the doghouse with a team that's doing very poorly to a Super Bowl contender in the New England Patriots.
This is very similar to the Emmanuel Sanders deal. Another older receiver that just deserved to be somewhere else right now. That somewhere else ends up being the best organization in football. So good for him. But yeah, this is a little different than the 49ers, as this was kind of a need for the Patriots because they just lost Josh Gordon to IR. They plan on releasing him.
I'm
just saying. Technically, it's more of a need than the 49ers did not need Emmanuel Sanders. They're 7-0. And they have one of the best offensive gurus in football. I have to say it technically. We all know that the Patriots probably could win with me and you as wide receivers.
I'm sure they could.
That team.
Sign me up.
But, so it's just, he's a great veteran. Like you said, he kind of fits that Patriots mold. And now with N'Keal Carey coming back anytime soon, off IR, because he was on the IR that doesn't make you out for the season. He's on the
short
IR.
term, so he's gone for at least 8 weeks.
So I think he can come back next 1 or 2 weeks, and now you can kind of slowly fit him in instead of force him in, which what it had to do if Mohamed Sanu had not been traded. So he joins Philip Dorsett, Julian Edelman, and eventually N'Keal Carey in a great wide receiver group. Just puts more stake to the Patriots being a Super Bowl contender. We all know this is their Super Bowl contender, and they did not need Mohamed Sanu, but this just helps them out.
This is what they do. The Cowboys are next on the list. They ended up taking a player from the New England Patriots, who we just talked about, and Michael Bennett, who's kind of been a journeyman defensive end. Michael Bennett, really known from his days with the Seattle Seahawks and that Legion of Boom, winning a Super Bowl with that team. He's bounced around. He played with the Philadelphia Eagles. Most recently was signed by the New England Patriots, but because the Patriots switch up their defensive scheme so much, and sometimes they play a 4-3 on defense, sometimes they play a 3-4 on defense. Michael Bennett wanted more of a traditional 4-3 lineup where he gets to line up with his hand on the ground. He did get into kind of a confrontation with one of his defensive line coaches and therefore was suspended for a week. And I think from there, the team just decided, hey, this isn't the best fit. The Cowboys were willing to take him. They only gave up a 7th round pick. So basically gave up nothing for Michael Bennett, who will easily kind of slide in as a rotational player. The Cowboys lost one of their kind of veteran leaders in Tyrone Crawford, who played on the defensive line. He's gone for the season. So Michael Bennett will, in a sense, take his place. And I think he's a great versatile guy that can play all along the defensive line. So for the Cowboys to not give up much and to get a veteran player who's a Super Bowl champion, I think it's a great fit.
It is a great fit. The only thing that comes with Michael Bennett is a little bit of controversy.
Right.
And so that's the only real thing you have to think about here. You got him essentially for free. Like you said, you got a replacement for Tyrone Crawford for free. But free comes with, like I said, a little bit of controversy. And even this year, there was controversy with the Patriots. So we'll see. I'm sure he'll be fine in Dallas. It will just help them be more of a Super Bowl contender than they already are, and it will help them solidify their chance to win the NFC East, which is the most important thing, because I think that's the best chance at the playoffs for them. Right?
Exactly.
So, although I think they could sneak into the wild card, I think they definitely need to shoot for that NFC East to make the playoffs this year. Michael Bennett will help that out. But you just never know with him.
We have 2 more trades. One really worth talking about. The last one we are just going to kind of brush over.
We'll just skip over that. I mean, like, Aqib Talib to the Dolphins, traded away. He was going to be on IR for most of the rest of the season. Wasn't really going to contribute to the Rams. Goes to the Dolphins for a 5th round pick that I believe the Cardinals had just traded the Dolphins the day before for Kenyon Drake. So so really nothing to say there. It's too bad for Aqib Talib that he goes from a nice sunny place in LA and Super Bowl contender to a nice sunny place in Miami that absolutely stinks.
The opposite of Emmanuel Sanders and Mohamed Sanu, where they go from bad teams to good teams. Aqib Talib goes from a good team to a horrible team, and just it's unfortunate, but that is part of the business, and the The Rams not only gave up Aqib Talib, they also had to give up a 5th-round pick just to get rid of him. So that's how badly,
That's true. I forgot about
apparently,
that, yeah.
the Rams did not want Aqib Talib. The last real trade was Leonard Williams, formerly of the New York Jets, who gets to stay in New York and play for
Same stadium,
yeah. New York Giants. This one was, here is the thing that I will say about this trade. The New York Jets are now in a 4-3 scheme with Greg Williams coming over as the new defensive coordinator this year. And Leonard Fournette, in my opinion, plays better in a Leonard Williams. My names are all jacked up today, by the way. So forgive me for that. Leonard Williams plays a little better in a 3-4 scheme, right, where there's only 3 defensive linemen going up against the offensive line. So because the Giants play in that 3-4 scheme, I think he's better suited for that type of scheme. Therefore, I think that's why the Giants made this trade. Other than that, I mean, listen, the Giants aren't really going anywhere this season. They are not going to make the playoffs. I think this was a build for the future type of move. But as far as this year goes, it doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense why they would have traded for him this year, other than this is for the future.
Yeah, it was a little weird that the Giants were the team that kind of picked him up. Although there was rumors that actually my Arizona Cardinals might go after Leonard Williams for the future, because there's not a lot of defensive line depth for the Cardinals. So it's not surprising that a team similar to the Cardinals got him. It was just a little weird because the Giants obviously weren't going to make the playoffs this year. Like, they're a little worse than the Cardinals this year. So it's a little weird. And the fact that it was the same cities trading with each other too was a little bit more strange. But let's switch topics real quick and talk about these New York Jets, because I don't really know what they're doing. I mean, like, you look at it 2 years ago. They draft Sam Darnold. Supposed to be the big new dude in town. He's going to rejuvenate the team. They didn't have a lot of talent, so there was not a lot of expectations last season. I think they ended up, 5-11, 4-12. They ended up having to draft Quentin Williams, so they obviously their record wasn't very good. But you saw the promise in guys like Jamal Adams and C.J. Mosley getting signed, and obviously Le'Veon Bell joined the team, and Sam Darnold. And then now this year, they unfortunately, Sam Darnold goes out with mono. Their backup gets hurt. They have to play a third string. Their schedule was tough. And they have 1 win all the way into this part of the season. But then to say that you're going to trade Le'Veon Bell, you're going to trade Jamal Adams, you traded Leonard Williams. Like, Jared, what the hell's going on? Like,
So let's back up, because from the Jets' perspective, they're saying that they never were engaging in these trades. They're saying that they never.
Where'd the rumors come from?
Put out calls.
Yeah.
To entice teams about Le'Veon Bell or Jamal Adams or even Leonard Williams for that matter. They're saying that teams have been coming and calling them, and that they have only been listening to offers, but they have never really wanted to trade Le'Veon Bell or Jamal Adams. Here's the problem. When you pick up that phone, even if you are, not willing to trade these players, the fact that you pick up the phone and you were willing to listen, that right there is showing that you wouldn't mind doing it, right? Jamal Adams came out and said, the Rams aren't picking up the phone for Aaron Donald if a team wants to trade for them. The New England Patriots aren't picking up the phone if a team wants to trade for Tom Brady. And Jamal Adams, even though he may not be of the caliber of Tom Brady or Aaron Donald, he feels that on this New York Jets team, he is the best player and a franchise type of guy. So he feels kind of slighted by the Jets even taking or even fielding these calls for him. The fact that he is from Texas, the Cowboys were engaged in talks with the Jets about Jamal Adams, but unfortunately that did not pan out. And I think Jamal Adams is now stuck in a situation where he's with a team that was willing to trade him, even though they say they weren't. And there's kind of a lot of friction going on right now. So the team has 1 win on the season, and now your star player, or players if you include Le'Veon Bell, are a little disgruntled. Not a good look, or not a good way to start a season for a first-year head coach in Adam Gase, who in my opinion did not even deserve the head coaching job. So this doesn't just go on the players. This doesn't just even go on the head coach. This goes all the way up to the front office and the management team, because I think they've completely mismanaged this team by hiring the wrong head coach and by making moves that just don't, some moves that don't make sense. So I think this entire organization needs an overhaul. This isn't just about the players on the field. This is about the people making the personnel decisions that need to get fired and let go, because I don't think they're doing a great job.
No, and there's a virus in the NFL right now, and it's called bad organizations, like you just mentioned. Like, there's so many bad teams.
Miami Dolphins, Cincinnati Bengals, New York Jets,
Cleveland Browns,
Washington Redskins.
Yeah.
That's just off the top of my head.
I mean, like, they haven't improved for years. Like, the Jets have been so bad for so long. The Giants have really been bad for a long time, too, and had 1 year where they made the playoffs. The Bengals, they kept Marvin Lewis way too long. The Dolphins have been awful ever since pretty much they had Dan Marino. Obviously, the Cleveland Browns, and don't need to go into that. And they finally added talent. Now they have 2 wins. And then these New York Jets, who just don't. I mean, it's terrible. Like, it's what is going on? Why are there so many bad GMs, bad front offices? Like, why is there so much bad decisions?
See, here's the thing that is, how do we say this? Just annoying. When you are, let's just take the New York Jets, right? Let's bring this down to one team. You're the New York Jets, and you have multiple first-round picks year after year after year, right? Which means you're able to bring in A-plus talent from the college ranks at a very cheap price. You have to hit on those, right? Jamal Adams was a success. Sam Darnold, even though he's still very young, looks like he is trending in the right direction. Leonard Williams was, I'll say he was a success. He wasn't the superstar that I think the Jets were hoping for, but he's still a very, very solid player, right? So the Jets have been able to hit on certain positions, but when it comes to the rest of their draft, when it comes to free agency, they just don't know how to scheme a team together, right? Personnel-wise. So, like I said, I think this all starts with the front office and the management team who is putting this team together, personnel-wise. They're just throwing guys together, right? Oh, let's just give Le'Veon Bell a bunch of money. Let's give C.J. Mosley a bunch of money. Le'Veon Bell, the bell cow, who has touched the ball more than I believe any other player in the NFL this year, has had a down year, and you're giving him about 13 or 14 million. C.J. Mosley has only played in 1 game this year because he's been injured. Obviously, that's not the Jets' fault. That's just an injury. That's a part of the game, but he hasn't been able to pan out, right? So it's been a multitude of problems for this Jets team, and now you add on the fact that you say you're not going to trade players, yet you're fielding calls from them, and now you have disgruntled stars. It is a recipe for disaster. Here's what I see happening. The Jets are obviously not going to be contenders this year. They will have another top draft pick. In this offseason, teams will revisit these trades for Jamal Adams and Le'Veon Bell, and most likely, if a trade does happen, they will get these players at a cheaper price than what they would have gotten them for right now. Yeah. The Jets only hurt themselves by what they just did.
No, and you look at organizations like the 49ers. The 49ers have been bad ever since they made the Super Bowl with Colin Kaepernick and lost in the game where the lights turned out and all that stuff. But now this year, with all those first-round picks, they are 7-0. They haven't lost a game. I'm gonna, to the Cardinals' horn a little bit. They were awful for years on years, and they finally figured it out and almost made the Super Bowl and were playoff contenders for a while. They kind of backtracked a little bit because a lot of players left. But you can slowly see them starting to improve again, too. So it's just, I'm going to throw another one. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, also another team that's been mismanaged ever since pretty much they made the Super Bowl with John Gruden. So, come on, NFL, let's figure it out, right? Like, it's getting a little weird. The parity in the NFL is not as good as it used to be, and it's, when I go through my pick'ems every single week, there's a lot of teams where I'm never giving them a chance to win unless they're playing each other. So, we do need to move on. We have about 5 minutes left here on this podcast. Sticking with football, we're going to move to college football. There's one game on everybody's mind in college football this weekend, and it has major playoff ramifications. That's the good old Georgia-Florida rivalry game that will be played in Jacksonville like it always is. Florida is number 6. Georgia is number 8. Those are AP ratings, so not necessarily what the college football playoff will be. But what's important about this game is it is for essentially a spot, a berth into the SEC championship game from this division. Both teams only have one loss. Georgia losing a horrible game to South Carolina in 2 overtimes. Florida's only lost to LSU. Jared, how do you see this one going? Who wins the game?
I always see defense wins championship. I'm a defensive type of guy. And I think many people would think I would lean Georgia's way. From every statistical standpoint, Georgia is a better defensive team, and I believe Georgia has better defenders and talent on that side of the ball. But I'm actually going to go Florida's way, and here's why. The Georgia loss to South Carolina left a horrible taste in my mouth, and I still haven't been able to get it out, right? I think that loss really took Georgia out of the title contention, even though they can still get into the SEC championship game, potentially. I don't see this team rebounding from that loss. Florida's loss was to LSU, who is currently ranked number 1 in the AP poll, right? So that loss looks a little better than losing to an unranked South Carolina team. So Florida's defense, by the way, is nothing to, their defense is legitimate. They give up about 300 yards a game, which is just a little more than what Georgia does. But for some reason, man, I think Florida right now, I think they're riding high. And I just, even though, like I said, all of the arrows are pointing Georgia's way. I think they have more talent, both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. I just think that as a collective group, the fact that their loss was to LSU and not South Carolina, I think from a mental standpoint, we also have to understand, these are dealing with 19, 20, 21-year-old kids, right, who they're not professionals, and I think that loss to South Carolina puts a lot more pressure on Georgia to win. Georgia has to win this game, right? Because when you go to the 13-person college playoff committee, they're going to look at this strength of schedule and say, okay, Georgia lost to an unranked team. Florida lost to the number 1 team in the nation, right? Georgia right now has the monkey on their back. They have all the weight on their shoulders, and I think it's more imperative for them to win. I think they're going to be playing a little bit tighter. They're not going to play as loose, and therefore, I think they're going to make a couple mistakes, key turnovers, that gives Florida the advantage.
I'm going to go with the stats on this one.
Okay.
As I have with a lot of the other college football games that we predicted, and I don't believe I've been wrong so far, so I'm just going to go this route.
All right.
We could probably review that, and I probably have been. But when I reviewed the thing about Georgia is their defense is great. But they also rush the ball better than a lot of other teams in college football. And I think a rushing attack in college football is something that we don't see as much anymore, and I just think that's a big difference. And when you look at the stats here, Georgia's averaging 236 yards per game on the ground. Florida only 142, so a clear advantage, almost 100-yard difference. Offensively, overall, it's very similar. Florida does pass the ball a little bit more, but I think Florida's quarterback isn't as good as Jacob Fromm.
I totally agree with you. Jake Fromm is an NFL-ready quarterback. He's going to have to play the game of his life.
No, exactly. So when you look at that, Florida may pass the ball a little bit more. It's only about 30 yards, but the quarterback for Georgia is just a little bit better. Well, no, not a little bit better. He's better. And then also rush yards allowed. Georgia only allowing 85 on the whole year. That's not good for a team that only rushes 142 total yards per game. And then Florida gives up 124. So I'm going to go with the stats on this one. I think Georgia wins a close one within a touchdown. I
think we can agree this is going to be a very close game. This is a rivalry game that's played on
home field advantage.
Played on a neutral field.
It's played in Florida, but Georgia's not far away from where
not at all. There will be fans. I think it's going to be a 50-50 split. The cool thing about this game is you always see both of these teams usually wear their home uniforms. So Georgia will be in their red, and you'll see Florida in their kind of blue and green, and both kind of dark colors. So that's always kind of cool. And it's a huge rivalry that's always played at a neutral site. So like I said, you're not going to get that home field advantage and that kind of upper edge for one of these teams. It will be neutral the entire way. I've got Florida. Nick has Georgia. It will be a close game no matter what. And the winner of this game, or I should say the loser of this match, not only takes them out of title contention with then now having 2 losses, but will more than likely take them out of that SEC title game as well. We do have to wrap up on this show, though. We have gone an hour long. We did talk about a lot today, right? We've got the Washington Nationals, the new World Series champions. Who in the heck would have said that at the beginning of the year? That would be nobody. We've got the New York Jets, a disgruntled team that was thinking about trading away some of their best players, and then they didn't, and now they've got a whole disgruntled organization. And like we just mentioned, a huge matchup this weekend with Georgia facing Florida. Tune into that game on Saturday.
Before we end this podcast, though, in honor of the Washington Nationals, when I do have a song that we should play, it's kind of the anthem for the Washington Nationals. I hope this is the right one. I wasn't listening to it before. I just kind of hope this was thing. It's the Baby Shark song. I got to play this. Hopefully it starts.
Okay. Hopefully you can hear this, or hopefully you cannot hear this right now.
You can hear it, man. And I'm not going to edit it out because there's no way I'm going to be able to.
All right. So for those of you who don't know, players in the Washington Nationals dugout the entire series were dancing to this and playing this. This is kind of their rally song, their fight cry. So this is how we're ending the podcast today with Sharky Doo. I'm Jared Smith.
Baby Shark.
Baby Shark. This has been the Cover 2 Podcast. We'll see you next week. I don't know what's going on.